Art 11, Cost Benefit Analysis Background. When adopting the provision of oil, gas, to preserve the disclosure regime, Supplement K, Regulation SK, and Regulation SX. Under the Security Act of the 1934, the Security Exchange Act of the 1934, Security Act of the 1933, Security Exchange Act of the 1934, Industry Guide of the Revision, intended to modernize the update with the oil gas disclosure, oil gas industry experience, and significantly change with the Commission initially with adoption of the current rules and disclosure regime in the 1978 with the 1982, including advancement of the technology chain with the type of the project of the oil and the gas companies and with the provision intended to provide with the investor, provide with the disclosure about the oil gas with the company's business with the current prospect without clarifying clarity with the comparability. B. Describe the new rule with the amendment currently with the industry guide with the specified with the menu with the disclosure guideline with the oil and gas company industry with the guide with call for the disclosure relating with the reserves, the production, property, the operation, addition with the which with the required with the regulation SK with the generally with the new rules and amendments codified with the update, existing industry guide 2 with the, and the disclosure with the new subpart 1200 regulation SK with the clarified with the level of the data. Level of detail required with the disclosure, required with the reserve, disclosure from the tablets or presentation chain with the relate, primarily disclosure of the following, disclosure of the reserve of the non-traditional sources, as oil and gas reserve, the optional disclosure, probable possible reserves, optional disclosure, oil and gas reserve sensitivity, private disclosure for the company, private with the converting and approved with the undeveloped resource with approved the developed resources, reserves, including the held with the 5 years or more, and explanation why they should continue to consider provided approved. Disclosure technology for the established reserve of the company and issue with the following with the commission and following include with the material addition reserve of the estimate of the company with the internal control of the reserve estimate of the qualification technical person primarily responsible to oversee preparation audit with the reserve of the estimates if the company requires representative of the disclosure basically on authority of the third party prepared with the reserve of the estimates conducting a reserve audit with the process of review following a report prepared with the third party disclosure based on the new definition of the term geographic area. New rules and amendments offer to make revision addition with the definition rule 410 with the best X with the revision update with the extent of the reserve of the definition reflect with the change of the oil and gas industry and the new changes. Particularly new and revised the definition explain with the definition of all of the gas producing activities include the extraction of hydrocarbon and oil, sand, shale, coal beds, other natural resources with the activity undertaken with the view such extraction added the definition of the reasonable certainty to provide better guidance of the repair regarding meaning of the term. Addition of the reliable technology with the permit the use of the new technology established prove the reserve, define probable possible reserve estimate, the definition of the explain with the terms of the provided definitions. In addition, with the amendment that harmonize with the disclosure requirement to apply with the form of private issue with the disclosure requirement to apply with the domestic issue with respect to the oil and gas activity, a particular amendment to Form 20F, it will require the form private issue with the disclosure of the information required with the items in 1205 through 1208 regulation as regarding drilling activity, present activity, delivery commitments, well with the acreage which are not currently specified with Appendix A of the Form 20F, although much of the disclosure is often disclosed by the companies during the more general discussion of the business and property on that form. Alright, the benefits. We expect with the new rule with the amendment that increase the transparency with the disclosure of the oil gas company to provide and improve the reporting chain with the revision of the definition should align with the disclosure of the rule with the relative of the oil for the modern oil of the gas markets. For example, believe the inclusion of the minimum and the other reach for the continued accumulation of oil gas producing activity consistent with the company practice with these operations apart rather than separately within their traditional oil gas producing activities. Similarly, with the expansion of the permissible technology for determining central level of reserve of the reckoning with the companies now with the taking advantage of the technical advantage of the making the business decision. We should have the new rule of the amendment to prove the disclosure of the line with required disclosure more closely with the ways of the company to conduct with their business. Allowing companies to disclose the probable possible reserve of the design to improve the investor outstanding investors' understanding of the company's unproved reserve for companies that already discovered the stuff of the reserve of the website with the new rule of the amendment and permit with the unified site with the discover of the single field with the document, the discover of the category with the reserve of the end with the approved reservoir may foster better company valuation, investor creditor with the analysis with the implement, proving capital allocation, reduce the investment risk, but some of the disclosure items are optional, rather than increase the transparency with the dependent with the extent with the which for the companies to provide with additional disclosure the permitted done with the new rules. If the company elects now to provide with the optional disclosure the benefits with the increase the transparency with the limited extent with the new rules, improve the transparency, the approved reserve the disclosure. By permitting the increased disclosure, promoting more of the consistency of the comparability among the disclosure of the new rule of the amendments, provide the mechanism of oil and gas companies to seek more favorable financing terms through the more disclosure, improve the transparency. Investors may be able to request additional disclosure of the Commission following such during the negotiation regarding bond and debt component. This we expect the result of the competing factor of the marketplace with the new rule of the amendments will result in increased transparency, either because of the company with except the voluntary provide with increased disclosure because of the investor may discount companies not to do so, whether they do not to do so. We believe the benefits of cost of disclosing unproved reservoirs ultimately will be determined by the market conditions rather than regulatory requirements. We expect permitting companies to discover the probable and possible reserve of the will, increase the market with the transparency with the provide the investor with the more reserve of the information, allow with the more accurate of the production forecast relating standards, with the deterministic method of comparable the percentage threshold, with the probabilistic methods of establishing given level of certainty. New rules and amendments should result in the increased standardization and improve the practice which would promote the comparable to the reserve of the crop of the country. The new rules would define with the term reliable technology to permit oil and gas companies to prepare for the preserve estimates. With the new type of the technology with the company is not permitted to use under the current rule with the new definitions designed by the companies the new technology as they are developed in the future, thereby providing as investors of the market with a more comprehensive understanding of the company's estimated reserves. Will we expect that replacing and guiding with the regulation SK with the provide generals greater certainty with the cover the disclosure requirements would be the rules established by the Commission. Additionally, we believe with the disclosure of the reserve of the concentrate with the particularly with the country with the providing their information for storing investors regarding the geopolitical risk of which some of the companies may expose overall. We believe that the amendments are a whole to provide the investor more of the information management used to make business decisions in the oil and gas industry. Alright, 1. The average price in first of the month, the provision chain with the price of the calculated reserve of the year-end, single day price for the historic average price that over the company with the most recently and fiscal year with the extent of the review of the effect of the seasonality, particularly with the many of the companies commoners possession of the use of the 12-month average price for the mitigate with the risk for the end of the year, but the effect with the short-term price volatile set, but it does not reflect the true nature of the company's investment planning with the performance are office with the economic analysis study, publicly available price data with the unfound evidence of the end price volatility and historically volatile year-end prices between 16 to 41% higher with the volatility annual year average price, being on the grade with the geographical oil gas consider the difference for the price demonstrate the variables within the oil gas price, likely due sizable the demands if it does not reflect long-term fundamental values. The content cannot be immediately corrected due to the cost of the transportation speed of the delivery, given the variability likely 12 months average price will yield better reserve estimate that reflect the management planning of the investment extent that they discount short-term component of the oil and gas price for the year-end spot prices. Many of the commenter for the proposing release report of the use of the historical price of the exam of the approach of the last year to determine the very value of the company, reserve of the compared with the future market price of the belief of the investor concerned not only about the quantity of the company's reserves, but also for the profitability of the reserve of the recognized some of the reserve that will be that more value than others due to extraction. Transportation costs as a result, since the new rule of the amendment to recover the use of the single price estimate reserve of the price may not be informative of the value of the future price. The new rules amendments also give the company the option of providing sensitive analysis of the reporting reserve of them based on the additional price estimates. If the companies elect to provide sensitive analysis, we expect the benefit investors along with the formulate with the better projections of the company with the prospect with the more consistent with the management planning price of the prices and prices higher than more reasonable with the achieve the particular allow for the company the flexibility to communicate with the reserve will change the ultimate economic condition, including but those that may believe that reflect with the future of the perspective we expect the company would be more likely to top sensitivity approach if the investors of the other market merges and determine the information would reduce the investment risk, or if the company's belief type of the disclosure would reduce the cost of the capital information formation. The new rule of the amendment should result in increase the price, stability, and determination whether reverse economically producibility should mitigate with the seasonal effects result in the reserve estimates more closely reflecting the use of the management and planning and investment decision. We expect with these allow for the more accurate company assessment, improve the projection of the company projects. In addition, the average annual price may be the commoners suggest that the price of the computed On the first day of the month, 2 reasons were given. The first being the month of the price would allow for the additional month of this preparation, calculation, reserve of the final reporting. Second, some of the comments suggest the month end, particularly year end of the price were subject of additional short-term volatility because of the oil and gas financial contracts expire on those days, resulting in a higher normal trading activity, which staff on the Office of Economic Analysis did not systematically evidence of increased volatility around the month and the year end of the oil and gas relative to the other day of the month. We agree with additional preparation time beneficial because of the reserve of the estimates for the requirement of the significant amount of the help to reduce the errors that might otherwise result from the financial reporting time constraint. Finally, we believe providing full cost accounting method to give the same pricing mechanism as reserve of the disclosure requirement should be provided with a consistent between the disclosure of the accounting presentations. The use of the single price method should also minimize the incremental burden of the plate for the companies as a result of the rule changes because they would not be required to prepare 2 separate estimates. R2, probable and possible reserve of the entity, but the disclosure of the probable possible reserve of the company effective to do so will allow the investors and creditors for the use of the betters of the company reserve of the addition with the tablet form with the disclosure of the probable possible reserve should reduce the investor search costs, making it easier to locate the reserve of the disclosure facility and comparable to among oil and gas companies, well with the reckoning of the company with the already communicate investors over the unproof of the other reserve of the alternative means such for the company website of the press release for the commenters margin for the objective comparison among the company for the difficulty of the different companies for the have to define with the reserve classification differently. We believe that permitting disclosure of the information commission filings for the provide the more consistent means of the comparison because of the disclosure of the filings must comply with our definition of all of the other new law of the made disclosure of the probable possible reserve of the optional oil of the gas produced with suggest comment layers and such disclosure would be limited to benefit to cover the relative uncertainty of the estimate. I believe that the competitive pressure within the industry might make it benefit for the large producer to discover the information created. The disclosure might, for example, improve the credit quality, lower cost of the debt with the financing, reduce the risk associated with the business transaction between the company and the customer and supplier with the regardless for the ends of the disclosure's decision. The voluntary should occur with only the extent of the company found with the benefit just cost of the doing so. We believe in the permitting disclosure probable possible reserve of the benefit of the smaller company with the particular with the large issue of the 10 that already have the large amount of the proof of the reserves. New rule with amendments permit smaller companies all for the participant in significant amount of the explanatory act with the disclosure of the business process with the consequently anticipate with the new rules and amendment leave with the efficiency with the capital formation information available regarding prospect of smaller issues. 3. Reserve the estimate and prepares reserve auditors believe the investor for the benefit of the greater level to determine the respect of the reliability estimate of the particular company with the allow with the disclosure of the unproved the reserve the unproved the reserves currently less certain to the proof the reserve the proposed discussion requirements relating to whether the person primarily responsible for the preparing reserve estimates conducting reserve audit of the company representative the enlisted third party to conduct the reserve audit with specified list of the specification based on society petroleum engineers reserve audit guidelines have the common express the concern of the menu with the qualification of membership of the professional salaries were not standardized worldwide without control over the team of the disclosure would not be comparable to we agree with the thermometer and such adopted more of the principle based with the disclosure requirements under the adopted rule of the company made disclosure of the internal control of the reserve of the estimation disclosure of the qualification of the primary technical person in charge of the overseeing of the reserve of the estimation of the reserve edit audit. We believe it is disclosure of the individual classification rather than simple acknowledgement of the meeting certain criteria, which make it different with the country provided the investor with the better information and with the compare with the person with the chain with the reservoir estimation reserve audit, which should enable the more accurate assessment with the quality audit report. We believe with the disclosure of the company, internal controls over the reserve of the estimates will allow the investor to assess whether the company has implemented appropriate controls without dictating with the company specified criteria for establishing those controls, although we do not expect the company to undertake the third-party reserve of the which become with our rule. So do not require the celestial reserves, audits, and third-party participation, estimation, reserve of the add credibility of the company public disclosure of the option of objective qualified person. Reserve estimates is designated with the increase of the reliability of the estimates of the investor confidence. 4. Development improved undeveloped the reservoir of the new rule with amendments over the requirement to disclose the company program to develop and develop the reserve of the reason proposed underdeveloped reserves have remained undeveloped for 5 or more years because of the 7th disclosure supplement of the amendments of the easy requirements of the proposed undeveloped and should increase the amount of the proposed undeveloped disclosure finding filings, even though the properties representing them prove that the reserve that has not been developed, therefore, they do not provide company with the cash flow will be with the disclosure requirements will increase the accountability of the company with the disclosure reserve the extended period of time without adequate justification of failure to develop the reserve's disclosure guidance. The release of the proof will provide guidance about the type of the information the company to consider the disclosure of the management discussion analysis will allow the company to include the information with the relevant table of providing with additional guidance should assist companies preparing with the disclosure improve the quality of the consistent with the disclosure of the located with the discussion on the table themselves that could be benefit the investor by simplifying the presentation of the disclosure of the providing insight with the information described within the table. 6. Updating with the definition related to the gas activity with the new rules and amendments for the update with the definition of the term oil and gas producing activities as well as the update and creating the definition of the terms related to the type of the activity to include prove the oil gas reserve with a reasonable certainty. Believe the update with the definition will help the company discover the oil and gas operation same way with the company with the managers and ensure the operation included the reach over the extractive with the really non-traditional sort of the company to consider the oil and gas activity previously were excluded with the definition of the oil and gas producing activities and addition to the definition of the term of the reasonable certainty with the currently the definition prove the oil and gas reserve but not defined will provide with the companies have with the guidance of the providing consistent with the disclosure between the companies. Alright, 7. Harmonizing foreign private issuers. Disclosure will leave the harmonizing of the foreign private issue. The disclosure will be helpful to make the disclosure of the foreign private issue the more comparable to domestic companies. Oil and gas industry with the chain with significantly some of the rules with adopted with today. Many of the companies enter the span of the global additional many of the projects are the joint venture between the foreign private issue for the domestic company would have a different level of disclosure of the company that may be participating in the same project harm comparable between investment choices for the harmonizing foreign private issue for the disclosure intended to promote the comparability among all oil companies. D. The costs. We accept the new rule of amendments that was allowed on the initial ongoing costs of oil and gas companies to burn the verify a significant amount of the among companies based on the disclosure of the company with the filing with the largest oil with the glass companies have as much as 10,000 times the reserve of the median report oil gas that would be expected the companies to have the reserve of the larger operation and with the corresponding larger amount of the information that they may disclose and therefore burden to comply with the disclosure requirements would be greater than larger companies. Although by adding to some part of the regulation as gave for the disclosure requirements for the unique oil gas codes companies support for the most part are codified with the substantive disclosure called for the industry guide 2. Disclosure requirements have been updated with the clarified requirement of the disclosure presented in the tabular form with the appropriate. Although many companies are with the present the information tabular form of the company do not require with the code input with the burden of the companies has transitioned narratively tabular disclosure format with expect to have with the increase of the preparation costs would be the highest in the first year of the after the adoption would be declining in the subsequent years of the company's job of the new format. We think of the burden of just because of the tabular disclosure would increase the comparable facility with the understanding of the analysis investors. Probable and possible reserves allowing the disclosure of the probable and possible reserve could create the increase the risk of the litigation because of the category of the reserves, the estimates of the left, the certain of the proof of the reserve that can make sure the disclosure of the reserve, the power of the cover the risk, creating litigation called for the defendant of the disclosure due to the increase the concern due to the category of the disclosure of the probable and possible reserve that may also result in revealing the competitive information cover that might reveal the company's business strategy, the geographical location, the nature of the exploration and discovery, for example, geographical detail that inferred from the estimate and unproved the reserves may reveal information about the value of the company as for the competitors of the good put the producer as a competitive disadvantage would have the producer the level of geographical detail for the burdens on the company will still provide sufficient information investors regarding the concentration of the risk included political risk. We expect the companies will incur the preparing with additional disclosure, so calculating, aggregating the reserve of the projection, the disclosure of the format, have the possible, the category of the reserve, the different extraction cost structure, then undisclosed separately for the proof of the reservoir that could result in the increase of the uncertainty of the investor assessment of the company prospect with the company also. Express with the concern of the mandatory disclosure, probable of the reserve that could expose the increase of the litigation risk of the belief that making the disclosure voluntary and mitigate the concern of the company unwillingly to bear added with the risk of them simply opt not to provide with the disclosure. 2. Reserve the estimate of preparers and reserve auditors. If the company true with the third party with the prior of the audit, reserve the estimate with the income of the current cost higher with the outset of the consult with the rules or new rules amendment if it do not record with the higher with the such person. Enough companies currently do not give the consultant to begin with a higher than believe the industry wages could be potentially increased due to increase demand with the reserve calculating specialist then left the demand with the compensate with the increase of the supply with the set of the personal wage with the increase of the come by then all the companies not just with the employment of the third party consultant would incur with the added cost. Large companies may most likely likely to hire third parties to cover the intent of the staff of the make of the reserve the estimates have with the large for the large companies such as the higher third party consultant with the third party would expend significantly more with the effort of the project with the small with the companies because of the large companies that have more properties to evaluate. Expect the third-party fee at the time of the conduct of such project will scale upwards of the quantity of the company reserves. Disclosure of the unproved of the reserve of the third-party certification present with the risk of the respect with the smaller oil gas produced because of the smaller companies are likely to less in-house expertise with the ability to accurately estimate the strength of the reserve of the larger companies. However, the understanding of the vast majority smaller oil and gas companies already hire third-party to estimate the reserve and certify with their estimates. 3. Consistent IAS International Accounting Standard Board. Some of the commenters recommend with the International Accounting Standard Board is currently preparing a set up with the guidelines of the oil and gas extractive activities, including definition of oil and gas reserve. The recommend with the Commission in line with the regulation of the guidelines. We intend with the monitor, initiate, and work with the International Accounting Standard Boards, but on new rules may be different with the guidelines. Ultimately, establish the International Accounting Standard Boards where they could make it more difficult for the investor to compare with the foreign domestic companies. 4. Changing the price mechanism. We do not anticipate significant costs in changing the price mechanism to help the reserve of the company. Simply with a different profit scenario to determine the economic producibility reserve of the possible even as 12-month average price may reduce the cost of the disclosure because it should reduce the volatility reserve of the estimate, therefore reduce the need to make the significant adjustment of the estimate yearly based due to the daily price swings. Disclosure proposed undeveloped development, the requirement of the disclosure of the company progress the proposed underground development reservoirs. We want to keep the cost of the reporting, however, we believe the company to regularly track with the progress of the renewable until the company develop the property for the cannot begin with realizing the cash flow of the full from production with the actual sale of the product with the development of the reserve of the utmost for the importance of the oil and gas company's business. 6. Increase geographical discovery. The requirements of the provide the increase of the geographical discovery of the reserve of the projection. Certainly, the circumstances of the may increase of the amount of the discovery of the company may present. How we go over the threshold with adopting with the release of the 15% of the company total reserve of the company would be required to disclose. At most, reserve production of 6 countries would consider the relatively large proportion reserve that must exist in countries before the company is required to provide country level disclosure. Believe that some of the information readily available to the companies know the value of the release. We have attempted with the draft of the provision minimizing any of the competitive harms of the disclosure may cover the company. 7. Harmonizing foreign private issue with the disclosure of the harmonizing the foreign private issue with the disclosure regarding oil and gas activity, increase the burden with the foreign private issuers. However, is over our understanding of the large foreign private issue with the already voluntarily provided disclosure comparable to the level required for the domestic companies. Much of the added new disclosure related to the day-to-day business of the property of the companies, including drilling activity, the number of wells, acreage. This information central activity of the oil and gas company, therefore, the nearly known of the companies, we believe the subpart 1200 of the companies prompt with the detailed disclosure regarding the activities would cause the companies incur some of the costs of provision permitting foreign private issuers to make disclosures if prohibited from making the disclosure they are making their home jurisdiction could mitigate some of these costs. Chapter 12. Consideration, burden, competition, promotion, efficiency, competition, and capital formation.